Yogaratna, you've just led a session in Transforming Self and World, which was really inspiring. You were talking about hope and positive emotion in Buddhist practice, particularly in responding to what can be increasingly difficult issues in the world. And I know that climate change, for example, climate breakdown, is something very close to your heart.
Oh yeah, sure.
So how do you think we can bring hope and positive emotion to Buddhist practice?
Yeah, I think we can do all the Buddhist practices in a way will be helpful, because mindfulness will help. Doing the metta bhavana, even insight practices can help us really sort of accept the situation with a basis of emotional positivity. So in a way, I was saying all the Buddhist practices are really great, especially faith, because I think faith addresses worldview. And we're surrounded by some bad news about climate change, but also we're surrounded by conditioning, like neoliberalism in society, in culture, in the politics. So I think faith operates on the level of worldview. So it reminds us about what's really dear to us. So I'm not meaning faith in a sort of theistic sense. It's a faith in a Buddhist sense, meaning that it's our heart response to ideals such as love and compassion. So faith reminds us what do we really hold dear, and it operates cognitively as well as emotionally. So it challenges the worldviews around us, like consumerism and looking after number one and things like that. So I think it can ground us in what really matters to us, and actually it's much more emotionally sustainable for the long term, I think. So I was particularly emphasising faith, but I was also emphasising how do we choose from all the practices that are available to us, all of which are really helpful in Buddhist practices, but bring them into our lives in a very meaningful way, or in the most effective way. So in order to do that, I was recommending especially a reflection practice. So reflecting systematically. I think we all do reflect, but it's like, how do we reflect in the best way that can actually help us change our lives, really.
There was a lot of talk, as there often is in our group, about how you balance, I guess, positive action that you can take and self-care and awareness or mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And you could have you talked about, it was an interesting metaphor used of a department store. We've got a lot going on in our life, don't we? We've got lots of departments to look after.
Yeah.
So how can we make sure, you can list a lot of Buddhist practices that are useful. How do you make sure that you're getting balance right? Because you tend to shy away from things that are difficult.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that in a way, that's why I was emphasising systematic reflection. I think we all reflect to some extent.
There's a train. Here we are outside the London Buddhist Centre, right in the hub of the community.
That's right where it matters.
Yeah.
So I think we all do reflect at some. We probably all reflect quite effectively, but I'm really talking about optimising our reflection practice. So that, because it's so complex, isn't it? There's so many factors in our daily lives. And we tend to be driven. We all tend to be driven by habits to some extent. So it's how do we? Reflection is a way we can actually break the cycle and take charge of our own lives a little bit more, and particularly have a more developed sense of what do we really long for, what do we really want. Because it's actually very difficult to really know ourselves that well, and it's only when we begin to get some kind of match between our deeper selves and our lifestyles, that deeper confidence and I think more sustainable positivity can come about.
How do you apply that to climate breakdown yourself personally? Because it's a really hard one to come to terms with and to look at all the time, and think, how are we going to get somewhere here?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to really look after ourselves and to listen to our deeper instincts about what's good for us. In a way, that's partly why I was emphasising reflection, because we need to tailor our lifestyles. Exactly what do we do? The complex mix of all the things we do.
Comes a car. For example, the complex world of traffic.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's quite demanding to optimise the mix of all the things we do. There's so many practices which are beneficial, so many aspects to our lives, factors in our lifestyles, that in a way that the optimum mix of all the practices and all the things we do is changing all the time. So it's quite hard to. I think we need to reflect in order to achieve a good
So for
mix.
you, because you're quite active in the sort of campaigning and things for climate breakdown, so for you, key in keeping going is that reflection you do, and you do that on a daily basis, do you?
Yeah, I reflect every day. I suppose everyone's got their own balance between self-nurturing, if you like, and turning to look at the world. And I suppose it's how to get that right, really, in a way that works best for us. In a way, if we don't turn to look at the world, I think we can go a bit numb. If we look at the world too much, we can also get overwhelmed. So that's why I was also emphasising faith, or at least you might call Buddhist emotional positivity, as a way of being more sustainable long term. I think it's very hard to look at all these things even a bit without quite deep-seated positive emotion, really.
I think what was interesting about the session is a lot of people brought up very personal places, I guess, where they felt they're stuck personally, as well as their frustration with what was happening in the world and how linked those two were. So
it's fascinating. I mean, you can't really the personal is the global, as the saying is, and the other way around. The two, you can't really separate transforming yourself from transforming the world, I think. How you treat yourself is likely to be how you're going to be treated in the world, if you like. And I think that the session was very good, as you say, I was quite impressed by how people are bringing their own lives into these big ideas, if you like, and bringing it home to their own experience and their daily lives, actually. I think, in a sense, if we want to be engaged in activism, or sort of what I call Buddhist activism, then I think it needs that kind of deep involvement, which is very earthed. It needs to be earthed well. But then I also wanted to make clear, I don't think that I think any Buddhist practice is actually what you might call activism, in a sense. I think any Buddhist practice is actually aiming to transform the world. There's no actual separation between the two. So it's a bit like there's a spectrum of practice, and activism is just trying to push for system change, or you might call it speaking out against systemic abuse and so on. That's all. That can be Buddhist practice too, and it's not really different to all the other Buddhist practices. I think they're actually very the same thing ultimately. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll have you again, and do come along to another session of Transforming Self and World. Pleasure. Thank you for having me.